Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook in some stew and put the horses into the barn. And time to move them out. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful farmhouses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. So I'm going to make a sewing project this week that is just for fun, just for me, because I want to. And I'm going to be using up a lot of different fabrics, a lot of different fun fabrics. It's kind of like a stash buster kind of thing. So let me show you the pattern. It's going to be a comfy pattern. It is this one. Doesn't that look comfy? And I do have rickrack. I have a lot of this red rickrack. Isn't that vintage-y? So I'm going to use that. And I'm going to show you my fabrics now, but I still need to take 2 of them downstairs and get them pre-washed and dried. They are all 100% cotton. And when I do this, I serge the edges of my cut edges of all my fabric, wash it in very hot water, dry it on very high heat because I want to get everything out of it and all the shrink out of it and all the sizing out of it that I can before I start sewing. So I'm going to go from lighter to darker in the thing, and my focal point on my top is going to be trash pandas. Ta-da! This is a Free Spirit fabric, and I love it. It's got the little raccoons in the trash cans, you know, doing things raccoons do. Lots of raccoons around here. So I'm going to be using this up here. And I also have, this is actually it's another Free Spirit pattern, but I only have like half of a yard of it. So I'm going to use that for something, but the colors kind of go together. Then I have some pink, 100% cotton, but very, very lightweight fabric. I'm probably going to do the sleeves with this. I'm thinking right now. I don't know for sure yet till I start cutting out. And then as we go down, I have a rose-colored fabric that I'm probably going to use more for the skirt. And this is actually 100% cotton flannel. Yeah, I'm incorporating a lightweight cotton, a quilting cotton, and a flannel cotton, but it's all cotton. It'll all wash the same, and I think it's going to be great. So let me go downstairs, throw these 2 in the washer. I've already serged the edges, you know, just so they won't unravel as I'm washing. And then that way also, if I ever use or I pre-wash something and I throw it back because I'm not using it, when I go to pull it out again, if like this one, I can see that it has a serged edge, that's my cue that, oh, I've already pre-washed this, so I'm good. So anyway, let me go throw these in and I'll be back to cut out my pattern. Okay, so first of all, looking at this pattern, it's got this rectangular piece here, and it has gathers up to it. So it gives the impression there's a waistline, but the sides are completely full and straight, so it's not going to be really a form fitting up here. And then because of that, from the back, it looks like it's a drop waist, okay? So whereas in the front you can see the gathers, in the back it looks like a drop waist. I think it's going to be fine, especially right now it's July. Everything is sticky, and I'm thinking that this could be a good, easy moving, nothing binding kind of a dress. And it looks like there's a lot of ease built in. I'm going to use my regular size 16. There's no darts, there's no real fitting to it, so I'm not going to worry about any pattern adjustments or anything. It's just a bunch of rectangular straight lines and gathers from what it looks like. The interesting neck. Now this is quite a low cut deal here. I don't mind that right now. That gives me extra ventilation, you know. Hello and welcome. Today is a couple days later. I've got my fabric all washed. I pre-washed my rickrack too. It's going to curl up a bit, but the last thing you want, especially with 100% cotton or cotton-ish trim, is for it to shrink after you've sewn it on. I have learned the hard way, you know, learned from my mistakes, so that is pre-washed too. But right now, what I have is out of this fabric, lovely and bright. I only had half a yard of this, and so, ooh, my hand's red, that's odd. Anyway, what I have done is this part. So I've done the collar, the little front lapped opening area, and this little bib area. I decided I want to make that really colorful because I tend to spill things. And so if I drip coffee on myself here, it's going to blend, and I'm good with that. Now I had planned on doing my trash panda fabric here for this big piece, but this is a little bit different. The pattern on my raccoons, my trash pandas, see their little trash cans, aren't they cute? It's going the opposite direction than usual. Usually, if there's a directional print, it's going lengthwise. Okay, this is going crosswise. So here's the selvage, and it's just that way. And because it's that way, I can't fit that piece on without, you know, them all being sideways, and that defeats the purpose. So I think the only way I'm going to be able to make this fit is doing my sleeves out of this. So there is an upper sleeve and there is a lower ruffle, okay? And so where are my colored pencils here? If I do, we're just gonna make this like this aqua color here, because that's what this background is. The sleeves, that, okay? I think that what would be kind of fun is to use my very lightweight, it's almost like a, what is it, voile? Ooh, I'm hoping I have enough of this. Like I said, this is a stash buster kind of project here. But I'm thinking of doing this for the remainder of this upper part up here. So I'm hoping that this pink will tie the pink in this part and the pink in the sleeves. You know, this little pink stuff here on the little raccoons together. That's my thought right now. Let me get my sleeves cut out. Oh, for the sleeve pattern. It is straighter up here on the top, very flared ruffle. And, you know, we always, or at least I always need to make sure that my sleeve is going to be big enough to fit around my upper bicep. And here I am doing my size 16, and it says the finished diameter, you know, after you take the seam allowances out, is 15¼ inches. So if I take my tape and line it up at that 15¼ inches right here, slide that up my arm, I can tell that that's going to be plenty big enough, plus ease to go around my arm so I can move around comfortably. So I'm not actually going to be making any changes to this pattern piece. So I'm just going to cut this and the ruffle out of my cute little raccoon fabric. Okay, so I got this part here and the back piece that's in that same general area cut out of my pink. So that is good. And I've actually decided I am not going to be using this. I think it's just dark, and it's a nice huge piece, and I think I will use it for something later, maybe in the fall. But before I cut my skirt pieces out and figure out what fabric I'm going to use for them, on the back of the envelope, if you look down here, you know, I'm picking my size, come all the way down, and it says the finished length for my dress, which is dress B, is 54¾ inches, okay? So I put my little clip at that measurement, hold this up to the base of my neck, and go look in the mirror. I did that, and this is like at the floor on me. And I want it probably a little bit higher than that is on her. I just don't want to have to trip on it when I'm going up and down stairs. So I'm going to take 6 inches off of my skirt. And I've decided what I'm going to do is just take 2 inches off the bottom of each one of these panels, so they'll still stay proportionally the same. I think that that will work. So, for example, this piece here, what I do on here, I will do on all of them. I'm just going to get my ruler, which is 2 inches, which is very nice. I can draw this line all the way across like that, and then cut along the very light pink line that you probably can't see, like that, across the bottom of all of my ruffle pieces, just to get that out of the way first, and then I will figure out what fabric I'm going to use. Okay, so I have pulled this piece out. If you remember, I did a cute little retro dress out of this a while back. I have plenty of it left, and I think going from the bright colored with some orange in it up here to the pink, which is going to be right here, to this is going to be nice. Plus there's this red rickrack in between. So I think that's going to work. I do need to wash this piece, so I have serged the edges. I'm going to run it down, and I have a piece of white that I'm going to use for this layer right here, and I think white in between this and the bottom, and I'm going to do this one in the bottom also. So that's going to be my plan, but taking another break to pre-wash and dry things, and I'll be back later. Okay, so I've got my pieces all cut out. This bottom skirt takes 5, there's one big piece you cut on a fold and you do it 5 times. Lots of fabric in the bottom layer. 3 pieces cut on a fold for this one. So lots of material down here, but I think it's going to work nice. I'm going to be starting up here at the top with my little center bib area in the front band. I don't think I'm doing the collar yet. I just got my thread turned over to white thread on my serger, and right there. And I'm going to be using Rosie, my old industrial. And I've got like a orangish red color thread. And if I'm using several different fabrics of several different colors in general, if I have the option, I usually want to make my thread more blending towards the darker color. That just works better for me. And I wanted to show you, if you have a serger, you probably know this, but if you're new to serging, whenever I change threads, I get a scrap fabric and run a test piece, and what you're going to want is this, where they lock together, to be at the very edge, okay? So if it's more towards, like when it started, oh, I think it was a different fabric, but if it's pulling more towards the front, that means you have to loosen the front a bit and tighten up the back, you know, so it'll swish that way. If it looks like your needle thread is a little loose, you might want to tighten that up. Just things like that beforehand, before you get your fabric over there. It's easier to fix it on a scrap and test your tension and all of that. And I have, so I am ready to go. So, like I said, we're starting off on this bib piece right here, doing the front part and this little lapped band area. So first of all, for the front, we're going to be doing a row of straight stitch or stay stitching right here. So that's at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just along where this neck edge is going to be right there. Okay, just to keep it from wanting to stretch out. But before I do that, what I'm going to go ahead and do before I do that, before I serge, is come in and clip all of my notches. So I just clip into it. It's only about a 1/4 inch deep. It's not going to hurt anybody. And then there is a dot down here, and I want to mark that. And the way I mark this one is how I'm going to be marking all of my dots. So I get my thick piece of leather and stick it under the tissue paper. My screw type leather hole punch. Punch out that circle for my size. And then, you know what? I have it right side out. I need to put this mark on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is just stick a straight pin through that little hole I just punched, okay? Open it up here. I can see where that little straight pin is, and get my heat erasable pen and just draw a little dot where the pin is puncturing the fabric. Okay, right there. So drawing my little dots there. And then that is done. So now stay stitch, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then after that I'm going to go ahead and serge all the way around these pieces. Okay, so I got that done, and actually while I was over it, I decided not to serge in this neckline because I'm going to have that collar over it. So I just serged all of these edges, and again when I serge I try not to cut off any fabric, just cover it up so that it won't unravel. So now for this piece number 2, which is the front band, I need to fuse interfacing to the entire piece, both of them. There's 2 of them there. And again, this is what I'm using, the usual interfacing, okay? So let me go ahead and get that fused onto both of these pieces. Okay, so I got the interfacing fused onto both of these pieces, and while I have it out, the collar is going to need interfacing. So I have 2 of these cut out, and only one of them is going to have interfacing fused to it. So I'm just going to grab that and get that fused on so I can put my little bolt of interfacing away. Okay, welcome to the next day. So at this point I've got these interfaced, and I'm going to flip them. Nope, I'm going to leave them right side up. Change my mind. They are the same. If you fold them in back, they are perfectly symmetrical, okay? But you need to make sure that you end up with 2 opposites. So that's why I have them next to each other. And at that 5/8 of an inch in position, I'm going to go ahead and draw a line straight down. That should match up with where the high point at the top is, okay, on each side. Now I'm going to run over, or walk cautiously, I guess, to my ironing board. And I have that line there to make sure that that is where I fold it, okay? So I'm going to fold it at that line and press that edge under on both sides. Okay, so now that that is done, I've got my front pieces here that I stay stitched, okay? And this part that comes down, that's the side we're going to be sewing to. So I'm going to pick the appropriate side here, line it up down the edge. There is a double notch right about here. I did not transfer over onto this piece, but honestly it matches up really well, and I don't think that it'll be the end of the world if I don't transfer that. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this at 5/8 of an inch all the way down, and I'm going to do that to both pieces. I decided not to be lazy, and I did go ahead and transfer those 2 little marks over, you know, because up here at the very top, what you're going to want to make sure of is that this point right here that is 5/8 of an inch in is matching up exactly, okay? Because if you try to match it up down like this, okay, so that those 2 are matching, that's wrong, because you see all that gap. This has to be all the way up right there, okay? So again, let me go ahead and go get this sewn on. Okay, once I got that done, I pressed these seam allowances towards the band over here, and I'm going to come back with my pinking shears and cut about half of that seam allowance off of both pieces like that, so that when I'm done, can you see? I've got about half the seam allowance like that. Looking at my wrong side here, I'm going to fold it so that my edge, my folded edge, goes just beyond, just barely beyond my stitching line, okay? So that I don't see it. And then I'm going to press it so I get a nice crease. So if you can see, there is my stitching line. This barely covers it. All right, so let me just do that the rest of the way down here. It's very important that you do not see your stitching line. Okay, so what they're going to want you to do to hold this down is to stitch in the ditch on this side, which basically means sewing right in this little crevice, okay? But to make sure that I'm not going to screw anything up back here, I've got a piece of stitch witchery, and I'm going to place that over my little pinked edge here. Rip that off, fold it back up at that crease that I just made, making sure once again I do not see any stitching, and press that in place. Okay, this way it's going to be glued in place, and so that I can feel really confident that then when I go to flip it to this side and stitch down here, I'm going to catch all of this, you know, because it's not going to go anywhere. So let me go ahead and do the other side. Okay, so I am over here on Rosie, you know, my big fabulous old machine. And I'm going to try to show you the stitch in the ditch. It can be a little tricky getting the camera in close enough that you can see, and yet far enough away that I can see. So let me see if I can zoom you in maybe. Maybe. So I used to have a stitch in the ditch foot, and I cannot find it this morning. It looked a lot like this with the blade in it, except the blade was exactly centered, and that would help you guide down the way, because the blade would just run down the middle. I have moved things around so much in this room since the last time I used it. I don't know where it is. I'll have to look. It might be on the floor in the corner. I have my feet up on these magnets, and sometimes when I bump them very securely, something falls. So that's what I'm guessing right now. Anyway, what you want to do is center that seam line, and you're looking at it from the right side, exactly where your needle is going to go down. So by hand, I just set the needle down, the first one. And I'm looking in between the toes of my presser foot to see exactly where that orientation is. And I go very slowly. And if you can kind of pull the fabric apart a little bit as you sew, that's going to help you. But I'm just going to go an inch or so at a time, watching carefully as I go, okay, all the way down. Now this one I've already done, so now there's my stitching in there. There's a couple places where I got this slightly off. The camera will focus like right there. That's not going to matter. That's not going to matter. So the thing is, with the stitch witchery in there on the inside, there we go. You can see that it's catching all the way across and giving me a nice stitch right there, and I don't have to worry about having gaps where that stitching's not going. So anyway, let me finish this side and I will meet you back at the table. And by a happy coincidence, this band matched that flower and that band matched that flower, so that's kind of cool. What I need to do is come down here at the bottom, and I'm overlapping that band exactly. The center front of this band is exactly the center of the band. If you look at this piece, it will tell you once you take the seam allowance out, the center front line is in the center. So just matching those up and stacking them is the way to go for me. So I've got that. I'm going to go ahead, stick a pin in there, run back to my sewing machine, and across the bottom here, you know, at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance or something, just put a row of stitching going across just to hold those together. Okay, so there's that little row of stitching, and just because this is going to want to flop all over the place, I'm going to put a pin in here about halfway to hold it, just to kind of hold it. Now here's the thing, this does not have any buttons or anything as far as I can tell all the way down, so it's an extremely deep opening. I have not looked ahead. I should, to see if they're actually going to have you do anything. Okay, they're going to have you actually tack this together up 4 inches on the bottom as part of their finishing. They're going to have you do this little stitch right there, 4 inches up, so it's going to hold it right there. My thought is, if that's too low for you and you want it higher, you could probably do it there and then wherever else you want it. I might go ahead and put that stitching in right now just to hold it in place so I don't have to worry about it. Okay, so I am just going to stitch this up, see if I can show you. I'm doing it from the back. I know they show it just a little bar tack on the front. I think it'll be less obtrusive. So if you can see, just taking little whip stitches up the side. I think that doing that all the way up instead of just one single little spot is going to look more natural. Plus then on the right side, this can still open up and act like it's moving freely, but it's just not going to go all the way through. Okay, so I'm going to do that up about 5 inches. Do it up however high you want to, or don't at all. That's your choice, and I will be back. Okay, with that done, I'm going to be working on this big piece that goes around that bib area. And I just took a look at their instructions, and they show something on the diagram that they do not explain up here. So I want to tell you this weird thing. It looks like they're telling you about reinforcing these corners, okay? Then they show clipping this out. What I am interpreting this to be is if you are doing the view A. Here it is, okay. So for view A, this little note right here goes along with this. View A is the sleeveless one, okay? So if you get here and you see this, you're looking at view A is that stuff, okay? So for that, they want you to trim 1/4 inch from the armhole edge of front and back bodice. That's what that is. We're putting sleeves on view B, so I am not going to be doing this, but just so if you get to this point and you're like, what the heck is going on? This little part here is actually this reference way up here. I know, it doesn't make sense. Why not stick that over here? That would make more sense, but who am I to say? Anyhow, I'm using this very, very lightweight fabric here, and it is cut on a fold, okay? I am going to be serging all the way around this. It's so lightweight. I think that I am going to hold off on putting all of my marks on until after I have serged all the way around it, just because I know this stuff is going to unravel like crazy, and it's extremely lightweight, so I will probably give it a quick iron, a quick press after I serge it, but before I mark it. And if I mark it first, then when I go to iron it, all my marks will disappear, and that will be frustrating. Okay, so it's serged, it is pressed. I had a little issue while I was dealing with water onto my iron, so this is a little damp. Ignore that, it'll evaporate. Not a big deal. I'm going to need to do some stay stitching in these corners. So there's a dot in this corner, and this dot is 5/8 of an inch down from each side. So just so I have a nice stitching line to follow, drawing a few inches beyond it this way with my ruler at 5/8 of an inch there, and the here also. My fabric is extremely lightweight and very movable, so drawing these lines in is going to help, because that looks more like a curve than a soft, I mean, it looks more like a curve than a sharp corner, you know. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side and just do a straight stitch down here and here. This is at 5/8 of an inch. I'm probably going to stitch it just barely this side of that stitching line, just so it won't show in my finished garment, but if it does, I'm going to be sewing it to this, which is so bright, no one will ever notice. All right, got my stay stitching in there, and I'm clipping up to, but not through, that stitching line. I'm actually leaving about the 1/16 of an inch there and over here. Now, we're going to start gathering, and there's going to be a lot of gathers to this project. For right now, this is so light, I'm just going to still use my regular machine, but I might set up a separate machine that I can just leave a super strong gathering thread in the bobbin in and just tag team back and forth between them. But for right now, regular is fine, because this is so lightweight, it's not going to make a difference. I'll explain later. But what I need to do is up here in this seam allowance, run 2 rows of gathering stitches, okay? So the first one at about 1/4 inch, the next one at about 3/8 of an inch or so, all the way across here. Okay, so I've got my gathering threads in there, and that is the bottom portion of this. Get that out of the way. There's these 2 upper sides here first. Okay, this is a very strangely shaped piece. This fabric, it's the same both sides, so I'm just going to arbitrarily choose what is the right side. Okay, so if, let's say this is the right side of this fabric and that's the right side of that fabric, I'm going to be sewing the side seams first, ignoring this for right now. Okay, so over here on this side, I'm going to flip this over on top. Okay, just get this out of the way, and on this side, flip this over on top, just to make sure I keep everything as it should be. Now with those kind of placed where they need to be, then I'm going to come back over here and get them matched up. And this little pink lightweight stuff is going to want to stretch, so let's see how well we're going to end up. There is a dot down here in the corner of this bib kind of piece, and that should match up with the dot that we did our stay stitching to. Okay, we're thereabouts, so that's going to work out pretty good. And when you stitch it, you only stitch up to, oops, it moved down a bit on me. You only stitch to that dot position. You don't go all the way down, you just stop it right there, okay? There is a notch right here. I can match up. Right now I'm just trying to get my cut edges together. Looks like it's going to match up well. So once I get this side pinned together and this side, stitch it from that dot all the way up at 5/8 of an inch on both sides. I'm not going to press it until after I get this sewn on though. Okay, so I've got these 2 side seams put in here, and now I need to match up this bottom part. So I should have marked where that center was on this large piece before, but I can do it now, just folding it in half. Okay, so this point here at the center is going to line up with the center of my little overlapped band pieces there. I'm pinning that in place, matching the raw edges. Okay, and now I'm going to pull my gathering threads. Come on, get these straightened out here. All right, well, I'm going to, trust me, I'm going to pull my gathering threads to get this cinched in so that this big front piece is going to lay flat, okay? So once I have it all organized, this will be flat across here. This is going to be flat across here like that. Now when you're getting it pinned on, this corner is not going to have anything on it, okay? So that's where we sliced that open with the stay stitching. And because this is sewn already, I'm just going to take this whole little fold of fabric and move it over to the side so that it's not going to be in the way when I come back to stitch across here. I still need to pin this side, but when I go to stitch it, I'm looking at this side, okay? And I can see where my stitching ended over here, so I can be really careful to line everything up. Oh, it's hard to hold it up and do this in the camera. Okay, so I can be really careful to line it up and then start my needle here with all of this folded out of the way and come straight across to that same dot on this side. Okay, so it is sewn on, and I have lightly pressed it so the seam allowances are going out towards this fabric, and it's so sheer that you can see everything back there. The instructions want you to come back here and do a second row of stitching 1/4 inch in, so like halfway down this seam allowance, and then trimming up to that point. I'm not going to do that just because this fabric is so light. It's not adding any extra bulk here, And if I do that, it's just going to be one more thing to worry about unraveling, because you can see how light it is. It's very sheer. But since the majority of everything that should be covered will be covered right there, having a very sheer sides and back, I think is going to be nice and cool. So I'm not worried about that. So anyhow, I'm going to set this aside and get my back piece, which is also out of this pink fabric. So the main thing with the back piece is I do need to stay stitch around this edge here. This is cut on a fold, okay? And I am going to go and serge all the way around. So the stay stitching is at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Serging, as always, is just the edges. Let me get both of that done and I will be back. So I have a quandary, a dilemma that I had not thought of before. This is a very long piece, okay? And it comes down, like my hip level is just below that rickrack, okay? So it's somewhere between waist and hip. I would say it's getting closer to the hip that this piece ends, okay? And it's thin. It is thin, which makes it very cool, but I hadn't even considered that it's so sheer, and if my waist is up there, you're going to be able to see the top of my underwear through that. And I am a lot closer to granny panty than stringy thong kind of person, and I'm not too sure that that's something that I want really visible. And I was trying to decide if I should redo it, reline it, cut a different piece here and everything, but I kind of want the pink in the back and the front. And honestly, I think the easiest solution is I have a very lightweight little half slip, and I think just wearing that with this is going to solve my issues. You know, it's not tight on you. It's hanging loose from the body. But I think by putting that little half slip on underneath it, I think that that's gonna give me the security I need. And honestly, if I'm just wearing it around the house, why bother? But out in public, I think that that's gonna be my solution, because I don't wanna reconfigure everything, especially after I just went through all of that to get the pink sewed onto the front there. So there you go. I know it's a TMI kind of thing, but I just thought I would share. This is my back piece. I've serged everything except for this top edge, and I do have my stay stitching up there at the top edge. So I'm going to go get my front pieces, and we're going to sew the shoulders together. So this is my back piece. I'm going to put my front piece on, right side together, and it matches up actually really well, so that's a good thing. Once I get it pinned on, I'm going to stitch straight across both shoulders at 5/8 of an inch, and then come back and press that seam allowance open. Okay, so welcome back. It's been a couple days. My daughter drove into town and we restyled the back of her dress again. I think it's done now. So I need to jump back onto this and need to start working on the collar. So we have the collar pieces here. One is interfaced, one is not. I'm going to be working on the interfaced one first. And actually, I need to transfer a bunch of markings over here. On the collar, there is a dot and a notch and a center back. I need to get all of those on here, and I'm going to put them onto the wrong side of my fabric. And I'm going to put the same marks on this side of my collar, on the wrong side also. And on the back of my blouse, I'm going to mark the center back of this neckline. So I got that marked. So we have a dot here, a notch here, a dot here, and then center back, and so on. All right. Now, before I try to attach it, this is the back, and that's the stay stitching. I'm going to clip a few notches. Take different scissors. I need to clip a few notches up to about a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch or so away from that stay stitching, so that this neckline can flex a little bit easier, because that's going to make my life easier. And then, now on this collar, the smile is this way. The bottom lip, the whiter part of the smile, is the part that gets sewn onto the blouse, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is match up my center back line that I put on here with my center back of my blouse. Okay, and I'm putting the right side of this towards the right side of the fabric in the back. Okay. Pin here and pin that in place. Okay, so the next little dot, which is right here, is going to line up with my shoulder seam. So I'm just going to get that so it lines up, and then put the cut edges together and pin that. This last dot right here is going to line up with the very outside edge of the fabric. Okay, so an easy way to deal with that, I find, is if I stick a pin through it, and then I'm going to line this up so with the raw edges up here together, so that that pin is just laying up against the edge. Okay. That way, if there's any kind of a curve, it's still going to work out. All right, so let me go ahead and get this part pinned into place. Now, you know what? I'm going to also clip up here in the front area a couple times, just like I did in the back, but up here, so that that can flex open a little bit. See how that's opening up more? And that's going to allow me to match this up so that the cut sides, the raw edges here, are going to line up, okay? So let me get this pinned together. Okay, so then back here, so you can probably see it with the pink better, where because I made those little cuts, it's a little more flexible, so it's going to lay. So these edges are flat with the edge of my collar. All right, so the same way that I just pinned this side here, I'm going to pin the other side. And so once I have all of this pinned on just like this, then I'm going to come back and stitch at 5/8 of an inch all the way across the entire collar area. All right, so my collar is sewn on. It's the right side, obviously. Here's the wrong side. And so what I'm going to do now is come back with pinking shears and cut off about half of this seam allowance, just like that. Get a nice little pinked edge. It's going to take a lot of the bulk out of the inside of that collar. Okay, so looking at it from the inside here, this seam allowance is going to want to get pressed up towards the collar. And my iron is not turned on, so I'm just pushing it up and running my fingernail over it, and I think that's going to be okay for right now, just because this fabric is so lightweight. That should make it want to behave. All right. What I need to do now is put the other piece. The piece that is not interfaced is going to be our facing. Okay. So I'm going to place that straight on top here. Get it pinned up so everything matches. The instructions are going to want you to fold this bottom edge up and press it 5/8 of an inch up. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait until later. But over here on the outside edge where this dot is, I am going to be folding it up. So I have a fold at that little 5/8 inch mark there. Okay, so just on the very edges, it's going to be folded up, but the entire way across the bottom is not at this time, just so I have a little more flexibility later on, and I will show you that. Okay, so with those sides folded up and pinned up like that, I should, if this seam allowance is pressed up, the bottom edge of this should now match up to the bottom edge of this fold. Okay. Okay, so I've got it pinned together, you know, this just matching up completely over there. The main thing is that those two folded edges should match up at this point where it intersects the front, okay? So the way that I'm going to be stitching this is at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, but I want to line up my stitching line, oops, just barely. Let me get you zoomed in a bit here. Okay, that's pretty good. So I want my collar to be able to wrap around this front edge really well. So I'm going to draw my stitching line. Well, here, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark where the 5/8 of an inch point is up here. So drawing a line 5/8 of an inch there, 5/8 of an inch here. There's a cross point right there where those two lines meet. That's going to be my pivot point up here at the top. I'm going to draw a line from that pivot point to just outside of where all of that meets together. If it's, oops, let me move that in. Okay, so if you can see that line right there, it's just beyond, just barely beyond, like less than a 1/16 of an inch where this is. That way I'll have enough space to be able to pull that right side around and it'll lay nice and flat, okay? And so down here it's not exactly 5/8 of an inch because stuff happens. But starting here and drawing it to that 5/8 inch point here and then follow it all the way around. And then I'm going to do the same thing in this corner, put a mark at that 5/8 inch point from both sides and then connect that line to just outside that point. And that's going to give me the stitching line for sewing my collar. Okay, so that is on. Now I can tell you if this was like a very tailored garment or something, I would be coming back and understitching the collar and doing this all slightly different. But this is a very casual kind of a neckband. It's not even really a collar, it's just a little neckband. So we're not worrying about that for this particular project. So I'm just coming back and trimming the extra out of the corner area here, like so. So from my stitching line, I still have like maybe 1/8 of an inch because I don't want to cut it too close. And if you have a lot of thickness over here, I'm going to trim mine so I have about a 1/4 inch seam allowance on my interface side, about 3/8 seam allowance on my non-interface side. Okay, flip the whole thing right side out and get it pressed nicely. Okay, I'm over here pressing it, just making sure everything's really nice. And I wanted to point out, you can probably see here, when I'm pressing it, this is the wrong side I'm looking at. Even though I'm not understitching it, I am kind of trying to roll the facing side down so that what I'm looking at here is a little bit of my outside collar rolling in, okay? And then pressing that nice and flat. And I'm doing that so that from the outside then, it's going to look really nice, all right? So that's my way, just one way. You do you, and I will see you back at the table. Okay then, so with my collar pressed, what I'm going to do now is just come back in here and make sure that this seam allowance right here is getting stuck underneath the collar. Turning under my edge of our facing piece, and I'm trying to do this so I can see under the camera, and I'm putting the edge of my facing at the stitching line, okay? So my stitching line, it's not really going to show, but it's going to be just right there at the very edge. And I am going to hand stitch this in. I just feel like it. There are other ways you can do it, and there are other ways that I have done it in other videos, so just pick what you feel like. But for me, I'm going to get it lined up, grab a needle and thread, go downstairs, have a cup of tea, and whip stitch this in, and then I will be right back. Okay, so this is on. It is all whip stitched in, nice and neat. And the way that the construction is going to work on this dress is we're not doing the side seams at this time. They're actually going to have you do the front ruffle onto the front piece, the back ruffle onto the back piece before you do the sides. It looks like once we get that first ruffle put on, then we can put in the pockets. And once the pockets are in, maybe hopefully we can sew the sides together. I don't know. At first I was going to skip around, put my sleeves in when I wanted to and everything, but I'm thinking I'm just going to follow their order of business, so we'll see how it goes. But this is where we're going to be here, okay? Where we're going to be gathering, actually, here's where we are, where I'm going to be gathering the upper ruffle and just sewing it on. This is my front piece. So what I wanted to point out is there's going to be a lot of skirt gathering ruffles here. And even though the fabric I'm using isn't really heavy, so it's not going to be that much of a pain to gather, by the time you get down here, you're going to be dealing with a lot of fabric. So I have two machines set up. I have Rosie. Let me see if I can flip this around. Okay, so I have two machines set up. I've got Rosie here, which I'm doing for the majority of my work with her little red thread, you know, fabulous straight stitch machine. She gets the job done. But for my ruffle gathering, I'm going to be using Pearl because she does an amazingly long gathering stitch. And what I'm doing is I am putting a very thick thread. This is like an army thread or something. It is an army drab army or olive drab army kind of thread. Very, very strong stuff, okay? I'm using this in my bobbin and then regular thread up on top. And because this is a thicker thread, you know, I have a white version of this that I use too for gathering. But because this is a thicker thread, when you put it into your bobbin case, you know, either like this or just set it into the machine, it's going to have a little bit of extra pull or extra tension, I guess is the word I'm looking for, coming out of here. So your tension's going to get skewed towards the bottom where your bobbin thread is. And between that and this thread being so strong there's no way it's going to break, it's going to make it a lot easier to pull very long, very secure gathers. So just so you know, she's the one that's putting in my gathering stitches and she is the one that's putting everything together. Okay, so I have here my skirt upper back and my skirt upper front. And what I'm going to be doing is, of course, serging around, completely around both of these pieces. There's just one cut on a fold for each of these. Up at the top, we have some notches set. That looks like about 1¼ inch in or so. I need to mark where that position is for those notches on both sides because we're going to run the gathering stitches from the notch on one side to the notch on the other side. So you're going to have, well, let me just measure what that is. Yeah, about 1¼ inch on each side with no gathering threads. All right, so that's the same up here. This dot, after I get the gathering threads in, I'll come back and mark this dot. This one here is for the pocket placement that we'll be dealing with later. So let me go ahead and get that in, serge around it, run 2 rows of gathering stitches from notch to notch on the top of both the skirt back and the skirt front. Okay, so I'm just going to set my skirt back piece aside for a minute, and we're just going to work on the front. I have a feeling what I do on the front is going to be very similar to what I do on the back. So if this is the front of my garment so far, I am going to mark my center front just to help me out here. Just going to stick a little pin right at that point so that I can match up the center front of my ruffle. So let me fold this one in half, and as you can see, I do have 2 rows of gathering stitches in. Okay, so if I find my center here, I'm just going to put a little fold right there so I can see it for a moment. Open that up. Here it is, and pin that right here. Okay. So then for each side, you know, getting my threads out of the way, the darker threads are the ones I'm going to be pulling. I find that using 2 different color threads on my gathering stitches is helpful for that. Okay, so matching up the corners and everything, that there should be a notch at this point on both the upper piece here and the ruffle. and we're going to be pinning it at that point, okay, because that's where we start pulling the threads. And then I'm just going to pin it again at the halfway point, so pulling these two apart until those line up. Pin it here, and so on and so forth. And I usually do that until I only have like about 6 inches or so in between. This is a little bit more, but that's fine, because that gives me a good guide for when I start pulling. So pretend that I've done this on that side also already. And let's just take a peek. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull my bobbin threads, okay, to get this all cinched up, spread it out until it's going to lay nice and flat, get my gathers adjusted evenly, and get it all pinned on. Okay, so now that this is pinned all the way across the top, I'm going to sew it straight across at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, once I have it sewn the first time, then what the instructions want you to do is come back and sew a second time at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, so a 1/4 inch less. So you're going to end up with 2 rows of stitching coming across here. Okay, so when I am sewing a ruffle, I like to have the gathering side up so I can see what's going on. And it's easier for me doing it that way so that I don't end up with ruffles, you know, where things get sideways and everything. So I only do a few inches at a time. Basically, I will make sure this looks good, pull a pin out, double check that everything underneath is nice and flat, you know, and it's not 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞. Go up until that point where everything is double checked, pull out a couple more pins and do the same thing just a little bit at a time. But yeah, looking at the side with the gathering threads on it, first of all, you can make sure that your stitching line is underneath your gathering threads so they're not going to show. But also, it just saves having to unpick things as much later. Alrighty, so I've got my 2 rows of stitching in, and what they want you to do next, actually you can probably see better on this side. Okay, got my 2 rows of stitching there. They want you to come and trim fairly close to the 2nd row of stitching. Again, I am using my pinking shears, and I'm not trimming off a whole lot. I'm not too sure if this is even worth it, but we are playing along. So basically, I want to take off as much as I can without interfering with that 2nd row stitching. Okay, once that is done all the way across, I have actually already pressed it, but you're going to press this so the seam allowance is going up, okay? So it's going to look nice from the outside and lay nice and flat. Okay, so at this point, with these raw edges still open, I'm going to go ahead and sew a piece of rickrack across here. I have pre-washed it so you can see it is a little bit curly, because that is what rickrack does, which honestly does not bother me. I will press this before I sew it on just so I have a flat place to start, but I am fully aware that as I wear it, it's gonna, you know, roll up a little bit, okay? Like so. I can always just choose to iron it more often, but odds are I won't. So I'm just measuring across here to get an idea of the length of the piece that I need. And the front piece of ruffle is a lot different than the back piece of ruffle, okay? So I have, this is my length. I'm going to add a couple inches, cut it, go over to my ironing board and press it so it's nice and flat to start with, and then I'm going to stitch it on. Okay, so rickrack, here it is. What I'm going to be doing is just placing it so the center of my rickrack is going down the dead center of my seam line, and just hold it there, and I'm just going to do 1 row of stitching down the center of it, okay? I think that that's going to be just fine, and the way I do it here is the way I'm going to be doing it for the back and for the subsequent other layers, okay? So my strategy is to first cut my piece to approximately that length that I need, iron it, and then sew it on like that. So let me go ahead and do this. The back ruffle, so this is my front. I'm going to be doing the same thing as I just did here to the back. The only difference is the back ruffle is a different width. You can see here, this is the front one. And if I put the back one on top of it, you can see that the front one is about 5 inches longer on each side, okay? But what I did here, I'm going to do the same thing here. I already have my gathering threads in. I'm going to match it up, stitch it up twice, trim that edge off the seam allowance, press it up, and then put the rickrack on. So next time you see me, I'm going to have both ruffles and the first row of rickrack on my garment. Okay, so I'm back from my little lunch break, and this thing is going on crazy train here, and I am not too sure if I like it. You know, I thought it was going to be fun, and this part here, I'm having trouble with the idea that it's just loose, not fitted at all, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. I know that as I add more ruffles, it's going to get heavier. But right now, what my thought is that the way I've cut it out is underneath this ruffle, I was going to have a white one and then another one of that same fabric. And to pull this together, which, you know, I still have to put my raccoon fabric sleeves on, which is another story, I'm feeling like I really need to be able to have some green, just so that that kind of makes sense, because all of these different pinks, they're really starting to annoy me. I probably shouldn't have cut it out, but you know what? It is what it is, and this is the point in the project where we push through and make the best of it. So, with that, let me tell you my thought. Okay, so this is my white ruffle layer. This is my Trash Panda sleeve. It's a white background with blue. But I really, really feel like I need that green in here. This is my pocket piece, but I have it here because I wanted to show you how this looks. Come on, okay. So I am feeling like this needs to be green, greenish. Maybe not solid green, maybe a mottled green, maybe something. And I feel like this needs green in it also to kind of tie in. Not bright green, but there is no blue in that front piece. And so I'm thinking if there was some green here. So I grabbed my bag or box of miscellaneous dye things, and I don't have green fabric dye, I don't have green fabric paint, but what I do have is green Easter egg dye, which is a very bright, vibrant color. So I have used Easter egg dyes to dye wool back when I was making a whole bunch of my own yarns and everything. So if you look at the very tip of this Q-tip that's in there, well, let me pull it out. That gives an indication of the color of these little things, okay? Which is a bright, grassy, you know, Easter egg dye kind of green. So, because, you know, at this point, it can't hurt to try. What I'm going to do is take my sleeve ruffle pieces, you know, off the tissue paper, of course, my middle ruffle pieces and my upper sleeve pieces. And I'm going to dye them with some Easter egg dye, okay? And if you're curious, what I do is I get boiling water and I put white vinegar in it, put the fabric in, and make sure it's completely wet, completely hot, and then I'm going to add these. Now, I am going to add these after my fabric is in and then stir it, because I want this to be not completely solid. I want there to be patches of lighter and darker, you know, an artistic kind of thing. I don't know if that'll work. It might end up solid, but we will see. But that's what I'm going to do. So let me take this down to the kitchen, get all that together, and then I'll come back up so we can work on putting the pockets into what I already have while this is processing. So now I have 4 pockets here, and there's a couple dots, there's a notch, but the first thing I'm going to do is just serge around each pocket and then iron them after I serge them, and then we'll come back and transfer those markings over. Okay, so back up here, I've got my pocket pieces serged, and I gave them a quick press to get the wrinkles and curvies out, and now I'm just going to overlay my pattern and mark where this top dot, bottom dot, and side notches on all of the pattern pieces on the wrong side. So I've got all of those marked, and I need to come back and mark this little dot here and the notch on my dress. So just punched out that little hole, lay this along the cut edge down there, and I can just mark that bottom dot and a little line where this notch is. And I'm going to do that on both sides of both the front and back upper ruffle. Okay, so I just did that, and I think it actually probably would have been better if I had marked it on the right side of my fabric, but we can make it work. My fabric is thin enough that I can see my mark. So what I do here, I'm going to do on both sides of both the front and the back. So looking at the right side of my fabric, I'm going to get a pocket piece that I can lay right side down on it. And here is my notch, so I'm going to line up that notch. The bottom dot should match up. And there is a top dot up here on the pattern, but I did not mark that because just these two will give me the right positioning. Okay, so let me make sure I've got my cut edges lined up here, and then I'm going to want to sew this at a smaller than typical seam allowance. So somewhere between 3/8 inch and 1/4 inch is usually what I would go to. The dot is actually at 5/8 for right now. So if that's where your dot is, your sewing line is going to be in more, like right about there, okay? So on all of my pockets, I'm going to stitch it around 3/8 of an inch, top to bottom, and then we'll press them after that. Okay, so now I am pressing my pockets. So looking at the right side, pressing it so that underneath the pocket is the seam allowance, okay? So doing that to all of them. And then I need to come back and understitch that, which means that for this pocket here, and for all the pockets, on the pocket side of this seam line, okay, I'm going to do a row of straight stitching, about 1/16 of an inch in, all the way, top to bottom of this pocket, and that's going to need to go through the seam allowance back here. Okay, so that line of stitching is going to hold that in, and I'm going to do that for all 4 pockets. Okay, so now back over here, I'm folding my dress together, wrong sides together, and I'm going to start to pin the front to the back, starting up here, right underneath the arm. Get that matched up. I'm going to match up this position at the pockets, making sure that it's set in exactly the same here. I'm just going to put a pin kind of diagonally there to hold that. And then underneath the pockets, again, making sure that that pocket seam is exact front to back, right there. Come on. Fighting with my pins this afternoon. Okay, and then come down here at the bottom. So now I need to match up the outside edge of my pocket and up here. So let me get that pin together. Okay, so the way we're going to sew this is starting at the top here, coming all the way down to this top dot. And because I ironed it, it disappeared. So I'm just grabbing this piece here. Now the dot is way over here when I lay it down. I'm going to go ahead and mark that position right now just so I can move my pattern piece out of the way. But if this is where it is here, I need to move it out so it is 5/8 of an inch from the edge, and I am looking for my ruler. Here it is. Okay, so if I have a 5/8 inch seam allowance coming this way, okay, does not want to draw on there. Come on. Okay, so that line there is at 5/8 inch. If I put my ruler here, that dot is 5/8 inch down from the top of this cut edge of the pocket right here. Okay, if I bring that all the way out, that's where it's going to hit, right here. Okay, so I'm going to come straight down to this dot, rotate, leave the needle down, rotate it at that point, come in, and at 5/8 inch, all the way around this pocket. Now here is my lower dot, right at this point, okay? So just like before, I'm putting my ruler at 5/8 inch, right about there, and drawing this line, okay? So if I bring this dot straight out to where 5/8 inch is, it's right there. So when I'm coming around this way, I'm going to go over these seam allowances, making sure the top and bottom seam allowances are both going towards the pocket, okay? Come all the way over those, past all the stitching lines to this dot that I just drew. Put the needle down, pivot everything, and then come straight down, okay? So, once again, from here, down, pivot around, pivot here, and go straight down. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Okay, so now I need to press this open. So, here it is. The pocket needs to go towards the front. This is the front here. Okay, so if I come to press this open from the bottom, I'm going to reach a point just below the pocket where I've hit the extent that I can. So what I'm going to do at that point is just this back seam allowance here, I'm going to clip it to within about 1/16 inch of that seam so that the pocket can move forward and this can still be pressed open. I don't want to go all the way up to my stitching line because then I risk, when there's something heavy in the pocket, pulling it and making a hole there. Then up here at the top, same thing. I'm going to press this open, okay, up to where the pocket is, left-handed because I can. Clip that back seam allowance, all right, and then move that whole pocket forward. So I just want to make sure that that feels nice and flat. And I'm going to go ahead then and press this pocket forward like that, okay? So hopefully when I flip it over, I'll have a really nicely pressed pocket opening. Okay, so if I lay this flat, ooh, for some reason my rickrack is higher on one side than the other, just by a little bit, and honestly it's so busy and, you know, pocket-ish, I don't think it matters, but I could pick out a few stitches and lower it if I wanted to. I do not want to, all right? But you can see that when it's laying flat, this pink is very, very lightweight here, but when it's laying flat, you don't see inside, you don't see that pocket, but I have a little lip of the outside fabric here, like that, okay? And if you were using a fabric that is the same weight, because this is so much lighter, it's wanting to pull inside, so my lip is a little bit less, you can have up to 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch folded in, and that's still fine. Okay, but for right now, I'm going to call that good. Go ahead and press the other side, and then run downstairs because the next step is to put the sleeves in, and the sleeves are still in the pot. What I'm going to do is pull or dump out the dye water, give all the fabric a quick little wash with just a little bit of detergent, just a little, and then put them in the dryer on high heat and dry them really well, and hopefully that high heat's going to set everything. And then I'll bring them back up here, iron them out, and we'll put our sleeves in. Okay, I pulled my fabric out of the dryer. I am not happy with it. A couple things. First of all, this must be more polyester than cotton, and nothing took to it. So it's, well, it is slightly off-white now, but it's not really green. And on this part, it didn't really turn green. It's more like yellow. And I don't want yellow, I wanted green, you know? So the Easter egg die was not a big winner here. I'm not ready to give up yet, but I don't want this. So I have some actual all-purpose dye. This is a wine color, but I'm not going to use full amount. I'm just going to use a little bit. So hopefully this will have just a wine-colored effect on it. And I'm hoping that that's going to blend with this, you know. And I just need to mention right now, when I first started this project, I said this is going to be a fun, just for me, stash busting kind of a thing. And it is, and it is. And I'm having fun with this. But usually when I do a project kind of like this, invariably there's going to be a handful of people who feel it is their sacred duty to tell me, you know, what a mess the colors are and how terrible they are for the project and, you know, how it's unflattering and yada, yada, yada. I don't care. I'm doing this project for the fun of it. And sometimes you have to experiment with different things on a project that is not a life or death project, just to learn, just to learn. So if I was doing a dress for a specific occasion, for a specific context that really needed to be right, that was going to be in the public eye, oh yeah, this would not be happening. But for a just for fun stash busting kind of project, just to play with different dyes and play with different fabric contents and everything and make something that might bring a smile to my face as I do, well, I think that that's fabulous, you know. So just wanted to point all that out. I'm going to go downstairs, do a little bit more dye experimentation, and I will be back later. I wanted to point out one other thing before I go back downstairs. Because that ruffle was more polyester-ish than cotton, and I really want my ruffle to accept the dye, I'm going to be switching out. I've got a little piece of this unbleached muslin, which should be just barely enough to cut 3 of these on a fold. So I am going to be swapping out the ones that I cut out previously, because I know that this is 100% cotton, so everything should work on it. So okay, so back from the fabric dyeing. Good news and bad news. The good news is that the muslin came out exactly like I wanted, where it's kind of this mottled type of a look, which was perfect. And to make sure I did that, I used a smaller pot so that there was kind of a little bit of wrinkle in the fabric. So that's perfect. And so I had plenty to cut out my ruffle, my center ruffle piece out of that. The bad news is that the Trash Panda fabric came out a little darker than what I wanted. Still fun, but I didn't think it was going to go very well with this. So I'm going to not use this, but I had enough extra of my muslin that I was able to cut out my main sleeve pieces. And to go for the ruffle bottom part, yeah, here it is. To do the bottom ruffle, which is this part of the sleeve, I'm just cutting out more of my very lightweight pink that I have here. And that's going to be my ruffle. So let me get this piece cut out, and then we'll move on with construction. Okay. So then the look is going to be, there is my top, there is my sleeve, and there is my ruffle. You know, it's for fun. Lighten up a little bit. Okay, let me go ahead and get started with construction here. This is my sleeve piece. I'm going to need to transfer over these 3 dots, notches. The side with 2 notches is the back. The side with 1 notch is the front. So before I go any further, I'm going to put a letter B here, flip the whole thing over, put a letter B over here. That way I know I'll have 2 opposite back pieces, B for back. And I need to punch these holes out, mark them like normal, get all of that marked, and then I'm going to go ahead and serge all around both of these pieces. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm going to fold my sleeves in half with the right sides together so all my marks are visible out here. And this seam, pin it together, sew it at 5/8 of an inch, and then press this seam allowance open like that on both sleeves. Okay, so that is them. So turning them right side out, they are looking lovely, and I'm just going to set those aside for a minute and work on this ruffle. Now, the ruffle, what I'm going to do is serge all the way around it. It's just a big rectangle, okay? Once I have it serged around, the only real mark on here is this notch, which is basically the center point. So, you know, that's going to be easy to find later. I am going to put my gathering stitches on before I sew this into a cylinder. So, excuse me, let me serge around it. Pick a side to be my top. Like I said, it's a rectangle, so, you know, it's up to you. After I serge it, put 2 rows of gathering stitches on one of the sides of both of these ruffles, and then I'll be back. And actually, it doesn't tell you to on the pattern, but just, you know, for me and my sanity, I'm just going to make a little mark 1 inch in, and that's where I'm going to start my ruffle gathering, just because I don't want to have gathering stitches anywhere near where I need to make that seam that's going to go right here. And this seam is going to be underneath my arm, so nobody's going to notice that I have that much of a space with no gathers in it. It'll just save my sanity. So let me go get this taken care of. Okay, so I only put 1 row of gathering threads on this. It's so lightweight and everything that I think that's going to be okay. It's a short amount that I'm gathering. If I was gathering any amount of length though, I would do 2 rows just because it'll save my sanity. So we need to get this attached. So I have this pin where that notch is, which is the center point, and I have my little notch marked here. I'm just going to stick a pin there too so I can find it easier. And while I am here, I'm just going to line up that with my seam allowance, and I'm also going to stick a little pin at that quarter position because that's going to be another key point when I put it together. Okay, and here I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just going to open this up really quick, line up that center pin with my seam allowance, and get these quarter positions pinned. It'll make my life easier later. With my sleeve right side out, okay, I'm going to stick it inside of my ruffle, right sides together. So I'm going to match up this seam with my ruffle seam here. Get my gathering threads out of the way and pin that together. And I'm going to pin both sides so I can pin my seam allowances open, just so they will stay nice and neat when I'm sewing over them. Okay. And then because I have my pins already there, it's really easy just to line up those positions. Pull one pin out and lock it in. Same thing here. I'm going to pin this where that one is, and so on and so forth. And then I need to pull my gathering thread so it's all going to lay nice and neat. Once I have it pinned together, then I'm going to go back to Rosie, that sweet machine, and sew it on at 5/8 of an inch all the way around. Okay, now I've already done this sleeve so you can see. And I only sewed it once. I think on the instructions they're going to want you to do the same thing as on the skirt where you sew it again 1/4 inch in, and then trim. I just don't think that is necessary. So I just sewed it once, pushed the seam allowance up and pressed it up, okay? So this is what it looks like on the outside. And on the pattern, they have you putting rickrack at the bottom. I'm thinking I might just put it right here because I have two different colors coming together. And this is so lightweight. I'm not sure that I want rickrack down there at the bottom to weigh it down. My only question is, how will red look right between the two different kinds of pink? And you know what? I think it is fine because it's kind of reminiscent of this whole concoction where we have reds and pinks and wines and everything like that, which is why this is coming to be. So once I'm at this stage and I have it pressed up, I'm going to pull off enough rickrack to do a sleeve and, you know, an inch or so more. And then I'm going to go over and iron this, okay, and then sew it so I can start it here, sew all the way around, and when I get back to this position, you know, pretend this is ironed, I'll just trim where it needs to be trimmed, so I'm just barely overlapping it, fold it, and then continue sewing so that I end up with a folded edge on top. Let me get it done and I'll show you what the finished product looks like. Okay, so this is my rickrack. I just wanted to show you where I started. See how I kind of folded an end over itself, you know, tucked it in and just overlapped it. This is that underarm seam area. And put it over the other one and just kept going. So it's secure, it kind of blends, it's all going to be good. Now, I'm just going to do a little narrow hem down here at the bottom of this sleeve, you know, quarter inch turn kind of thing. And I think I'm actually going to do this by hand, seriously, only because I have red thread in one machine and I just don't feel like rethreading it at this point. And I kind of want to go sit downstairs for a minute, and it gives me something to do while I am down there watching something or other. I don't even know what. So when I come back, I'll have this hemmed and then we can get them put into the garment. Good morning and welcome to the next day. So this is what my sleeves look like right now. I think they're fun. Just a little, you know, hand stitched tiny hem down there. And we're going to go ahead and set them in. I just did a quick look at the instructions and they do not call for any easing stitches or anything up here at the top of the sleeve cap, so that's great. So let's just show you one, and then whatever I do for this one, obviously, I will do for the other also. So this is my front, this is my back, that's one of the armholes, and I need to make sure that I put the right sleeve on the right side. And I'm hoping I did not erase my little marks. Did I? Oh, that could be bad. Okay, this one has my letter B back here, okay? So I need to make sure when I put these right side together that this side matches up with the back, and it does. So just to get it started, I'm going to go ahead and pin it down here at the bottom, okay? And then up here at the top, let's flip this up. So now looking at it from this orientation, I'm going to match up the top dot on my sleeve. There was 3 dots here, okay? This top center one is going to match up with the shoulder seam, okay? Let me get that pinned on there. And since there was no easing stitches or anything encouraged, I am going to assume that it's going to fit in fairly nicely. So there are notches down here at the bottom of each curve, just about where it starts to curve upward. You need to make sure you get that matched up there. And over here, right there. And okay, so there are upper dots here, but I'm going to see if I just kind of smush it in between these two areas. Sometimes it can look a little bit ruffly on the cut edge, but at that sewing line, at the 5/8 inch seam line, it's actually going to fit well. And if you run your fingers in there, you can tell. So I can tell that is fitting very well. I'm happy about that, so I'm just going to go ahead and pin it in. Once I have both sleeves pinned in carefully, then I'm going to go ahead and stitch it in. Oh, what do they say? They do want you to do it twice. Okay, so the first round of stitching is going to be at 5/8 inch all the way around. Then you're going to come in about a 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch or so, and do a second round of stitching all the way around. Okay, so my sleeves are on. I've got my 2 rows of stitching in there. Looks like I have a little thread here I need to clip. And in the instructions, what they're going to ask you to do is come back in here and trim near the second row of stitching. And I'm not going to do it all the way around. I'm just going to primarily focus down here at the bottom. Yeah, I'm just going to use regular scissors this time. But from, I would say, just above the notch on one side to just above the notch on the other side. Okay, that's where I'm going to clip out, because that way there's less stuff under your arm right there. But up here, that's just going to help give support to that sleeve cap area, so that's not a big deal. I'm going to trim the other side and pop this on my dress form so we can get a look at what we have so far. Okay, there it is. So, you know, it's fun and happy and all of that kind of stuff. The one thing that I'm seeing right now that I'm not a super fan of is where this pocket is coming in the side here. It's at the fullest point of your hips. And there's not a huge amount of ease in this pattern, okay? Lower, you're going to have tons because of all of the ruffles. But at this point, at the fullest part of the hips, not a lot of ease. And that combined with this line coming there, you know, it's like accentuating that wide part of the hips. But also with the pocket at the widest point of the hips, I feel like it will more want to pull open just because there's not a whole lot of extra. Now when I put this on, it'll fit me better than my dress form. I don't know why, it just is what it is. But that's just my only concern right now. I'm thinking that if I will leave my judgments till it's done. I was about to say if I was to do it again, I wouldn't put those pockets right there, but I'm just going to leave that for later. I think that, you know, the back is pretty basic. The neck, the collar is going good. The colors are fun, bright colors. Sometimes in the summertime, you just want bright colors, so that's good. I'm going to go back to the desk and we're going to get started working on that middle ruffle, which is the one that I dyed last night. Alrighty, so here we are. We have piece number 9 is the one that I'm dealing with. It just says skirt ruffle. The top ones say upper ruffle, the bottom ones say lower ruffle. If it just says plain old ruffle, that's the middle, okay? Now there's 3 of these, and I'm just going to sew all of them together at the edges to make one long circle, okay? I'm going to do something that I rarely do, but I am right now, is I'm not going to serge around this until after I get all of these individual pieces together, because then I'm going to come back and serge these 2 edges together. I think that that's going to be fine, and for this ruffle, I think it'll make sense. So let me go get all of these sewn together. There's 3 of them right here, 5/8 of an inch. I am not pressing them open. Okay, so I've got it sewn into one big circle. After I sewed them, serged these edges together, okay, and then I pressed it over to one side. I did that for the other ones also. And then I came back and I serged all the way around the top, all the way around the bottom, okay? Now in the instructions for the gathering threads, they are going to recommend that you run a set of threads and stop at every seam line, okay? And you can do that if you want to. You know, you do you. What I am going to do is do one massive set of gathering stitches all the way around. And I feel confident doing that because I am using that really, really heavy bobbin thread. If you're just using a regular weight thread or, you know, a just all-purpose thread, I would not, because that's too much danger that something's going to break. But with my experience, with my strategy, it will be just fine. So I'm going to put in 2 rows of gathering stitches, one at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, one slightly smaller, okay, all the way around. And pretty much what I am doing with this ruffle, I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom ruffle, so I'm not going to go into this much detail about that. But I'm going to go make sure I have plenty of bobbin thread to get started and get these put in. Alrighty, so with my little top ruffle, top of my shirt thingy, I am finding my center back point because I'm going to be matching up one of the seam lines there. And I'm also going to find my center front because I'm going to match up the center of one of my panels here. Okay, so with those 2 positions marked, get my ruffle, and you can see I've got my 2 rows of stay stitch, or of gathering stitches, long rows with super thread there. All right, so I'm going to match up this one to the back. There you go. Here you are, back piece, putting right sides together. All right, going to get that pushed on there. Now, since there's 3 panels, I need to find the center of the panel that is opposite what I just pinned on here. So here it is, and when you're sewing these, make sure they don't get twisted. That's important. Okay, so this is the center of, well, actually, this is, if I have those 2 match, the center that's going to match up to my center front. So I'm going to go ahead and get that pinned on, and then just kind of split the difference all the way around. Find the halfway point, pin it to the side seam, find the halfway point, pin it to that quarter position, and then pull all the threads so that it can get gathered in. One thing I wanted to point out when I'm pulling gathering threads, and it's a huge amount, what I like to do is, you know, give a nice tug, get a good amount pulled in, and then before I do anything, I'm tying a knot in these 2 threads to hold them together, so that then as I go ahead and move all of these gathering stitches down the line, they're not going to get askewed, because sometimes if you don't, one thread will stretch out more than the other and it gets unbalanced, and that just makes life a little bit more difficult later on. Oops, pulled out that pin. I'll have to fix that in a bit. And also at the center front point, I have 2 pins. That way I know when I get to that point, because I'm going to gather all the threads from the center back to that point and then come and do the other side that way. Okay, so now that it's all pinned on, I'm going to come back and stitch it again at 5/8 of an inch all the way around, and then come in and do a second row of stitching in about 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch all the way around. I'm not going to be making any trimming or anything. I don't think that's necessary with this weight of fabric. So let me get all that done, and then after that I'm going to press it so that the seam allowance is going to go pointing up towards the bodice. Okay, so I've got my skirt on, my seam allowance is pressed up, and now I'm going to come around with, you know, this funky red bric-a-brac. I'm going to start it in the center back and just sew it all the way around, doing what I did before, where I get to where I'm overlapping, fold it, stitch over it, so everything looks finished. Okay, so I've got this ruffle on here, and you know, this is still just serged. I got my not zigzag ric-rac on, and I need to tell you, I just held this up to me in the mirror, and at this point it is this length here, okay, and I like it short. I am afraid at this point that if I put this bottom ruffle on, you know, which is this fabric here, that I'm going to go full-blown moo-moo. But at this length, it's actually kind of cute and spunky. So I'm not going to put it on. I am going to hem the bottom and put my final row of rickrack that I've been saving here onto the bottom, because I can't imagine I will use this for any other project, and get that on there, and that's actually going to call it good. So, you know, if it was a solid color and everything, or of different fabric, I think I would do the bottom one. But I think that I really want to stick with "Oh, isn't that cute?" more than "Oh, isn't that great grandma at the beach?" You know what I mean? So for my bottom edge, I'm just going to do a little narrow hem, just like that, and I am going to machine stitch it, okay? So it's just turned under at the serging, turned under again, and then I'm going to edge stitch it all the way around. Then I'm going to come back and put my row of rickrack on the edge so it just peeks out a bit like that, and call it good. Okay, so all done. I am glad that I left that bottom row of ruffles off, because I think it's cute. I think it's cute. I'm actually surprised that I like it as much as I do, you know. It's just started out as a bizarre stash busting kind of project, and I definitely used up several pieces that were too small to use on their own in a garment, but you know, got something out of it. I think it's fun. I think it's, you know, great for running into town, to the grocery store or whatever. Is it, you know, runway ready? No. But is it fun, light, comfortable, 100% cotton, and just spunky when you need something uplifting? Definitely yes. So I hope you liked it. I do like it. I do like it. Remember, I did sew this up here. So if you don't want to have a whole bunch open, because I can tell you this, I'm going to back up again. If you did not sew this open and you pull your arms straight back, everything's going to want to open up. And if you're using it like a bathing suit cover up or something, that's going to be perfectly fine. But you know, for me, I would shock and horrify my local villagers, I can tell you that. So anyhow, I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free of big city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.